Hey guys, hope you're all doing well today. About a month ago, I did a Strikers Battle Gear Explain video. A lot of people seem to really enjoy that, and I want to definitely do more of them, so today I wanted to do a Tactician video for you. And I know that it's obviously a month later, but there's only so much time that I have to really sit down and work on these, so I want to make sure that I hit the really popular gear sets first. So if you have a recommendation, please let me know in the comments below for the next gear set that you would like me to break down. There's also a possibility that I will pair up gear sets and do them into one video. Those videos might be a little bit longer, but I think it's going to make it much more simple that way, because some of the gear sets are really straightforward and they will be really easy to explain. I'll start this video off the same way that I started off the Striker video, just by explaining that there are multiple gear sets in the Division 1. In total, there are 14 gear sets, and all of them have their own unique bonuses and benefits to the player that uses them. The bonuses that the gear sets are going to offer you are unique, and they're going to heavily influence your playstyle depending on which one you decide to play with. Unlike the high-end gear that has its own individual specific talents, gear sets are going to offer bonuses when you equip anywhere between 2 to 4 pieces. Usually the more pieces that you equip, the better bonuses you'll receive. That can depend on the gear set though, but we'll talk more about those as they come. All gear sets also have a variant called Classified, and the Classified gear has greater stat rolls than the standard sets, and they also provide more exclusive 5 and 6 piece set bonuses, which offer even more specialized builds. You have to collect the full Classified gear set in order to unlock the 5 and 6 piece unique bonuses. You cannot mix and match between the regular gear set pieces to unlock those. Classified gear is also really rare to find in the game. They have pretty low drop chances from multiple different activities, and considering that the global events at the time of this upload are currently offline, it can take you quite a bit of time to obtain a full 6-piece set. I do have multiple videos and guides of how to obtain Classified gear. I'll make sure to leave those in the description for you guys to go check out. And the last thing that I'll say before actually getting into Tactician is just to keep in mind that you'll begin to receive Classified gear once you hit level 30, meaning that you can obtain Classified gear that will be a really low gear score. It's recommended to reach gear score 256 as quickly as you can, because that is going to be considered the best gear in the game. But now that we've covered the basics, I'm going to go ahead and break down Tactician's authority. So Tactician is easily amongst probably the strongest gear sets in the game. It does shift your playstyle completely in one specific direction, and if you would like to unlock the full potential for the gear set, I'd like to recommend having all of the stat rolls in favor for electronics over stamina or firearms. Considering this set is going to primarily use the power of your skills, it's just a better idea to do electronics versus stamina or firearms, but there are many ways that you can build this gear set, so there will be opportunities to utilize both stamina and firearms in different builds. So first I'll break down what each of the bonuses actually do. 2 pieces of Tactician is going to unlock 15% additional skill haste, and this is already a huge step forward in the build's potential. The base cooldown for skills can be a really long time, but with 15% given to us just with the very first bonus, you're able to get your skills back at a much faster rate. And 3 pieces of Tactician is going to unlock 10% additional skill power. This is another really big step forward for what the build can do, as an increase of skill power will heavily increase the efficiency of our skills. So your healing skills are now going to provide even bigger heals, and offensive skills are going to do more damage to opponents. And what I mean by offensive, that is along the lines of sticky bombs, turrets, seeker mines, etc. And finally, 4 pieces of Tactician is going to unlock the Tactician's Authority talent, and each bullet that you hit on enemies with your weapon is going to add 1% additional skill power. Shots landed with your deployed turrets also add 0.2 additional skill power. Both of these are going to be capped at 30% additional skill power, and it is going to be consumed on skill use. So to break it down simply, anytime you land shots on an enemy, you're going to be collecting stacks for you to use on the next skill that you deploy, and the number of stacks that you have is going to be showing in green underneath your HUD. This is going to represent how many stacks you have, and it's also going to represent how big of a percentage of increased skill power goes towards the next skill that you use. If you get this number to 15 stacks, that means you have 15% additional skill power up to 30%. Now that we've talked a little bit about up to the 4-piece bonus, let's get into the 5 and 6-piece bonuses. Starting with the 5 pieces, it's going to give you 5% additional skill haste and skill power. This bonus is not very strong, but I think it does compensate well with the fact that the first 2 bonuses were so high. 6 pieces of Tactician is going to unlock Improved Tactician's Authority. This one can be kind of complicated, so I'm going to try and make it as simple as I can. Using a skill while at max stacks is going to reset the skill power buff, but it's going to raise the next cap to 60. Using a different skill when you reach 60% has a 40% chance to reset the buff power back to 30 instead of 0, while keeping the same cap at 60 stacks. This chance is going to increase by 20% for every 3,000 electronics. Now, the good thing about the 6-piece set is that you are essentially doubling your skill power buff from 30 to 60%. However, you're not always going to have that 60% unlocked. A big reason why the 6-piece Tactician is not widely popular is due to the fact that you can't use the same skill twice in a row, and you have to use your skills in a very specific pattern. While 30 additional % skill power is a lot, it does require a bit of skill prioritizing, which can be ineffective in some scenarios. In my personal opinion, Tactician is better off as a 4 or a 5-piece set paired with specific high-end or exotic gear to substitute for the 6-piece bonus, and is best dedicated towards offensive skill builds. I will say, however, that a 6-piece bonus for Tactician is really fun to use with skills like the self-heal and the pulse. I'll go over some of the special synergies for Tactician's Authority, starting out with some of the weapon talents. First is Talented. If you eliminate a target with this weapon, it's going to increase your skill power by 15% for 20 seconds. This effect doesn't stack, however, killing a new target is going to refresh the timer. One thing that I want to make note of is that you don't actually have to eliminate the target with the weapon itself. You can just have the weapon in your hands, and your skills can do the eliminating, and you'll still get the full effect of the weapon talent. So, Talented is an excellent option to just have on your primary weapon while your skills are doing all the work. The next one is Determined, and we've talked about Determined quite a bit on the channel, but I'll still describe what it is. If you eliminate a target, it's going to reduce your skill cooldowns by 7.5%. This is also similar to Talented, where you can just have the weapon in your hands and you don't actually have to eliminate the target with the weapon to benefit from the talent. So, having Determined on my guns is kind of like a no-brainer. I have to have Determined on them because I'd like to get my skills back as much as I possibly can. And I'll talk about these next 2 talents together because I would never run these 2 talents by themselves. I would always run them together if you can, and that is Ferocious and Destructive. Ferocious is just going to let you do 10% additional damage to elite and named enemies. It's very important to note that this does count for your skills too. So I would recommend using this on a lower gear scored weapon so you can make sure to unlock these talents, because using a lower gear score is it's going to keep the actual bonus the same, and it's going to just lower the requirement for that. Considering you're going to be a skill build, you're not going to have much weapon damage anyway, so it's just best to use lower gear scored weapons to unlock some different talents. It's going to be the same thing with Destructive. This is just going to increase your armor destruction value by 15%. Same deal, you don't actually have to use the weapon, it will apply to your skills too. And we'll quickly go over Predatory as well, because this is another one you should probably use a lower level gear score weapon with, or you can just put it on the bottom slot. But Predatory is going to regenerate 35% of your health over 20 seconds. So this is a really good weapon talent to use in lieu of a healing skill. It's going to keep your HP up as much as possible. And the last one I'd like to go over is Competent. This one isn't necessarily a must-have just because you're not going to have much weapon damage to begin with, but it is one of the few talents that you can unlock on the top slots no problem, and it may help you get to talents such as Talented and Determined much easier because you are going to increase your weapon damage by 10% for 15 seconds after using a skill. Now that we've talked about the weapon talents that I would recommend for Tactician, let's go into some of the high-end and exotic gear alternatives that work really well with this build. I'll start off first with the backpacks just because I think they are the more essential piece to the build, and I'll start off with Inventive. Inventive is a high-end backpack talent, and it's going to increase your skill power by 15% as long as you're at full HP. Using Inventive is going to help you reach pretty much the full potential for your offensive skill damage builds, but staying at full HP can prove to be pretty tricky. If you utilize your cover, as well as your teammates and weapon talents such as Predatory, you should be able to allow your skills to do all the damage and should be able to remain at full HP as long as possible. But if you're having trouble with Inventive, I would recommend something like Relentless instead. Relentless is another high-end backpack talent, and 3% of the damage dealt by your skills is going to be returned to you as healing with this backpack, and it's a really great alternative to using a healing skill. I would rather suggest putting on an offensive skill damage build and just allow the skills to bring your health back for you. And it's probably the most reliable piece that you could put on a Tactician build. I actually have a video utilizing the Relentless backpack. I did a solo legendary Napalm. I'll go ahead and link that in the description so you guys can watch that. And finally, the cherry on top for Tactician builds, in my opinion, is the Barrett's Bulletproof Vest. The description for this chest piece is a little bit long, so I'll try and make it as simple as I can, but essentially it's going to increase your skill power by 10% when you have no skills on cooldown. It will also increase your damage by 5% when you use one skill, and it's going to increase your armor by 10% when both skills are on cooldown. The first bonus is going to provide the strongest one just because it directly gives us more skill power if none of our skills are on cooldown. Now, before getting into some of the tips that I have for actually building Tactician, I want to get into the abilities tab and discuss the talents that I'd recommend for the gear set. The first talent that I want to talk about is called Strike Back because I think that it's the most important talent to use. Strike Back is a medical talent, and it'll give us 20% of a bonus to any active skill cooldowns when we reach our last health state. I think Strike Back, just by itself, is extremely useful for any build. I pretty much never take this talent off no matter what build I'm using. The next talent that I'd recommend is called Death by Proxy, and if you destroy a hostile's deployed skill, you're going to increase your skill power by 20% for 30 seconds. This one, I think, in Legendaries is a must-have for a Tactician build, because a lot of the NPCs are going to put down healing stations and turrets and stuff, so those skill proxies do help you in many different ways. The next talent is also a no-brainer talent. This is Demolition Expert. If you kill a hostile with an explosion, you'll increase explosive damage by 20% for 15 seconds. This one's a no-brainer to throw on your Sticky Bomb or your Cluster Mine builds, because once you eliminate a hostile, you're going to increase your next explosive damage by 20%, which is a really big number. One of my favorite talents to use is Tech Support. If you kill a hostile while any skill is deployed, you'll extend any active skill durations by 10%. This one is really, really good to use if you're using the turret on your Tactician builds. It's also really good to use on any other build if you have a support station or a pulse. One talent that I'd like to quickly go over is actually Shrapnel. Shrapnel is not necessarily a very good skill talent, but it does work really well with the cluster mines. If you damage a hostile with the cluster mine and you affect bleed on that target, it does have a chance to spread that bleed, doing more damage to multiple enemies. And finally, the last talent that I'll go over is Chain Reaction. If you damage multiple hostiles with an explosion, you'll apply 20% more damage from the blast. So this doesn't add multiplicative to many enemies, like it doesn't stack up 20% for every enemy that's within the radius, but this does just apply 20% flat more damage to the enemies that are within the blast. So this is really good to use with your Sticky Bombs and your Cluster Mines. I do think that's all of the skill-related talents that are actually worth mentioning, so now I'll go into a few of my favorite ways to actually build Tactician, starting off with my very most reliable build that I go to pretty much for any kind of content I play. This is utilizing the Barrett's Bulletproof Vest. This is an offensive skill damage build with either the Inventive or Relentless backpack. I primarily use Inventive. I feel like I get more value from that because it is going to output the most damage possibilities, but Relentless is also very reliable, so I do have them both and I will swap between them depending on which content I'm playing. I use the Relentless a lot in legendary missions, so it's a very reliable backpack to have. I would highly recommend just having both of them in your inventory so you can swap between them depending on the content. The next way that I like to build Tactician is by utilizing the 5-piece bonus. Again, the 5th piece is going to give us 5% additional skill power and skill haste. This is a very reliable way to build Tactician, especially because while the Barrett's Bulletproof Vest is very strong, you're not always going to have that very first bonus unlocked. The same thing with Inventive. You're not always going to have Inventive unlocked. So the 5-piece bonus is a really good middle ground between the two, where you're always going to have that additional 5%. And another way that I like to build Tactician sometimes, but not all the time, is a 6-piece hybrid. I like to keep the stats a bit persistent as far as firearm, stamina, and electronics. I like to find a good middle ground between all 3 of these. You can also utilize the specialized backpack if you'd like, but the 6-piece hybrid is going to allow you to actually alternate between the skills a bit more to keep the bonus, and I would recommend doing this with a booster shot for the heal and the pulse to let you output some more damage. So this is a great alternative While this might not be the best way to build Tactician, I do think that it's quite a bit of fun. It's a really good build to utilize for Dark Zone gameplay. As far as the talents that I use for these builds, like I said, I pretty much always use Strike Back. I never really take this talent off no matter what build I'm using, so I highly recommend Strike Back. I also like to use Death by Proxy, especially if I'm running in the legendary missions, because a lot of the NPCs have med stations and turrets that you can destroy, so you'll get that 20% additional skill power for 30 seconds, which is a pretty good amount of time for a skill build. And if you are running offensive skill damage builds, I always like to recommend Demolition Expert and Chain Reaction. These talents work pretty much hand in hand with each other. If you are not running these two, just run some good talents that you think might work. Triage is really good if you're running in a group, because if you have the booster shot, you can just throw that down and heal your allies, and then you can get the cooldown on your other skills a lot faster. And as far as the rolls on all of the gear, I always recommend to roll skill haste absolutely everywhere possible. This means the chest piece, the holster, etc., even the gloves. Don't focus too much on the gloves as far as weapon damage, like don't do critical hit chance and damage. I don't think that this is a good combo unless you're doing the 6-piece bonus and you're going for more of a build with a pulse. I think that's the main exception there. Otherwise, I would like to recommend to just keep skill haste on everything. If you're doing this for PvE content, make sure you roll enemy armor damage wherever it's possible as well, and make sure to utilize the ferocious and destructive weapon talent combination on your low leveled weapons. You can go to the blueprint vendor that's in either the terminal or inside Camp Clinton. These vendors sell blueprints that you can check every so often for lower gear scored weapons. Would definitely recommend picking up a weapon that has ferocious, destructive, and probably talented or determined on the bottom slot, because you're going to be able to do a lot of extra damage to the PvE content NPCs. And really quickly before I end the video, I'd just like to say, because I know a lot of you guys are probably going to ask about it, is how you can utilize Tactician for a Ninajabike build, and the short answer is every way possible. If you think about it, Tactician is one of the very few sets in the game that is going to benefit almost any build that you actually want to use, because it's going directly towards your gadgets and your skills and stuff. So it's going to bring your skills back faster for one thing, and that's just starting with the very first bonus that it gives you. It's also going to make your skills more efficient. So your pulses are going to do better crits. Your shields are going to have more health. Your heals are going to be bigger, etc., etc. So I always like to just mention that if you are utilizing a Ninajabike backpack and you're really early on in the game, so you don't have very much gear, but you were really lucky and managed to get a Ninajabike, Tactician is probably one of the best gear sets that you could put in slot for that, because it's going to help directly towards one of the main things that makes the game fun. I do think that's going to wrap up the Tactician's Authority video though. If you are a veteran player and you have additional advice to give, please leave it in the comments. I always like to ask the veteran players to help out some of the newer players that are just finding my videos. It does go a really long way with them, and it helps me out too, because there's a lot of stuff that I'm sure that I missed in these videos, so I greatly appreciate your guys' input and feedback. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you in the next video.